welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and we will discuss on seeds of innovations. We have our youth fellows and very energetic, and he has a great contribution for World Talent Economic Forum. We have our Carlos Ortega. We have our world famous speaker, Professor Dave and Professor David Smith. So, Carlos, now, how you want to define seed of innovations? What's your thought?
Are you asking just kind of to just the first thing that comes off the top of my head when I hear it?
Yeah, no, I do you want to define the seeds of innovations, or do you want to share your Silicon Valley experience with our audience?
Well, I think for me, I've always told people that when it comes to, so I work for a startup right now, and then before that, I helped start a startup, and I've always been lucky to have the opportunities to do that. But when it comes to when I think of just seeds of innovation, I'm not sure if this is what what the any actual definition is, but I've always just thought of it as kind of the whole thing with innovation is you've or just like with business in general, or building a startup in general, you just want to find a problem and then find your solution, and then you start from there. And for my first job, we did transportation, so we were trying to make self-driving technology for trains. And then for this one right now, I'm working for a company that we have a machine that doctors use for surgery to cut out cancer tumors. And both of those don't really have a lot of competition and don't really have a lot of people in that specific niche. So I think seeds of innovation kind of just starts with that. You just look for a problem, you look for one where there's just not a lot. It would be kind of hard, but there is still stuff out there since both of the startups are pretty new in the last few years. Yeah, you just find a problem, see something, a niche that hasn't been touched, and then you start from there, and then a lot of money is involved, a lot of hard work is involved, a lot of design. So I come from the engineering aspect of that. Is kind of my background for that.
Thank you, Professor Dave. How you want to define seeds of innovation based on your Green Action book?
Well, I'm going to start before Green Action because this is not my first rodeo. And I've always done the same thing, although in a different field. First, I have to think outside the box. And as Carlos says, first you find a problem and then you come up with a solution. So I think outside the box and create something small with the objective of creating something big in the long term. So I have two walls behind me. The one wall is my current wall, or Green Action, and the other wall is what I did before. And what I did before was I started with an idea, and that was that kids needed to have movement. They were, especially boys, were full of energy and needed to have movement and ways that they could express themselves. And I had seen a juggler juggling three objects, and I said, "Could you teach me how to do that?" And he said, "I'm not allowed to. I was taught by a magician, and the magician won't let me teach other people." So I watched him for a while, and I said, "Not only can I do what you do, because you're just making infinity signs over and over again in the air, but I can slow it down, and I can take three slow moving objects and create something out of it." And I did. And so with that little thought, I created an industry. So if you ask anyone in the world who knows how to juggle, have you ever heard of Dave Finnegan? They'll say either, "Oh yeah, he taught me to juggle," or they'll say, "I have one of his books, The Joy of Juggling, The Complete Juggler, The Zen of Juggling, Juggling from Start to Star." Now, how did that happen? Well, the way every big program starts is with a small idea. And you get into that niche, whatever that niche is, and you go step by step, and you don't quit, and you stay positive, and you build on what you know how to do. And if you do that, the money will come and your program will grow. So with that in mind, I shifted completely to the other chart, and that is Green Actioneers. And Green Actioneers is going to start small and get big, just like Juggling for Success did. And Juggling for Success eventually went worldwide, and I sold the company because it was so profitable and I was doing such a good job. But it all had to start with that thought: what is not being done to solve a particular problem? Well, the problem now is that even after all those years, this object right here means we've got to get back into juggling, because kids, instead of doing this kind of movement, big movement, using both sides of their brain and both sides of their body and tracking and quantifying, instead of that, they're sitting there doing this. So you'll see a resurgence of juggling over the next 15 or 20 years, because I'm starting it up again. In addition, I'm going to be doing the Green Action program. And both the programs, when you think about what you're going to do, you have to think about where you're going to do it. And so with both the juggling program and the Green Actioneers program, I'm going where the people are. Well, where are the people? In school. And who are the people? Kids and their parents. Not just kids, because kids alone can't solve the problem, but kids and their parents. So that's what I've decided, is that Green Actioneers is going to do what Juggling for Success did. And we're going to go into schools and get the kids and the parents together to work on a problem. And the problem isn't a little tiny problem. The problem is the biggest problem humankind has ever faced, and that is the climate crisis. But again, you can't just jump into these things and say, I'm going to solve the climate crisis. Instead, you take a little piece of it. And my piece is people who don't believe that the climate is changing or that people are responsible. Instead, they're going to go green. So that's how I look at this. I look at it as taking a tiny little idea and making it into a big program. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, how you want to define Seed of Innovations as you are running iBeyond? And my next question, what unmet local problem is solved at a scale and could create the greatest social and economic impact in the next 10 years?
Dr. Shreve, thank you. And thank you for letting me tackle the two different ones here. Really, to me, Seeds of Innovation really mostly refers to the other elements, the early ones, that make innovation possible. So what are the conditions? What are the needs? What's the real valuable changing that can happen? And it really is one that needs structure, it needs support so that they can become new products, new services, new processes. And it works across all the different areas. And really, Seeds of Innovation is a foundational set of capabilities. It's how do you do creative thinking? How do you do strategic thinking? How do you do transformational thinking? How do you look at things from a wide variety of stakeholder perspectives and different external factors that can change your innovation as well as your internal ones? And it's really, the real interesting thing about Seeds of Innovation is it's really a metaphor that kind of emphasizes it's not on demand. It's seeds that you have to nurture and grow and mature before you can get into the innovation. And to me, that's a lot of what seeds of innovation mean. But to go to your second question, what is really an unmet problem with the highest 10-year impact? To me, it's to look at how to fix, how to update, how to establish our new infrastructure that works in our digital age. Because a lot of our infrastructure does not work here. It's not just infrastructure, it's a absence of a modern, connected, resilient, AI-enabled local service infrastructure. It's there. And why is it so important? Well, it's root the infrastructure causes so many downstream failures. Schools can't teach digital learning. Hospitals can't operate efficiently. Housing becomes more expensive. Logistics slow down. Youth and unemployment raises. You see that because of your infrastructure, often the climate shocks that you have really become much larger because you don't have the data, you don't have the ways to control it. But also, the infrastructure unlocks a compounding of economic effects because with a modern infrastructure, and Sharif, you know, I use the word technopolis a lot as I talk about these. It results in a lower cost of living, higher business formation rates. You have more participation from the workforce, from the regulatory politicians, from academia that pulls it together. You foster more investments, you get higher property values. And in this context, Dr. Sharif, a update in infrastructure fosters faster innovation cycles. And it lets you begin to look at what it is. As you know, Dr. Sharif, my vision of how this infrastructure comes in place, it's a distributed, mesh-based, digitally anchored infrastructure where you have microgrids, local water reuse, you have district cooling, you've got local compute, local AI orchestration, EV charging, local logistic heads, and many different ways, but each one is connected to the other. And because of that, it gives you resiliency. It lets you have a way to manage and work within your sovereign. It gives you sustainability and digital transformation. And it's really there. You know, the biggest nodes on that are energy, water, compute, connectivity, mobility, economics. And that is really, I think, if I look at the next 10 years, Dr. Sharif, I think that is really one of the biggest unmet needs we have globally.
Thank you. My next question is to Carlos, like how can traditional knowledge be combined with the modern science or AI to create a new and sustainable solution? As you are AI expert and you are engineer, Carlos.
So I think firstly, I like when I think of a question, I like to break down. So traditional knowledge, I'll just assume means kind of back when we read textbooks and traditional knowledge passed down from generation to generation. That and then how can we combine that with the new advances we see today or AI in order to create solutions? I mean, a simple way to answer that question would be that of course AI still sometimes even ChatGPT can make stuff up, but you can still use it for brainstorming and things like that. But the idea is that perhaps one day those AI models will be even better and won't hallucinate as much. So if you were to, let's say, just assume that, then you could use AI to brainstorm ideas. I mean, you can use AI to, I think one of the, actually thinking about it, one of the kind of the interesting aspects I saw, and I'll talk about a a friend's experience. I know a friend who's a teacher for 5th grade, and so he likes to teach. He teaches math, science, history, all that. And I think that would be a great way to answer your question, because traditional knowledge, teaching, classroom, you have your teacher creates curriculum, has it approved by principal or just the school, and then goes through the lesson plan with their kids. My friend who's a 5th grade teacher, he has started to use like Gemini, or he would start using I forget the other one. There's like another one specifically for teaching. I think it's called like Magic School Bus or Magic Learning, something like that. And that's a great way to bridge the gap, because he for many years taught, the traditional way. You sit down over a summer, you write your lesson plan over the course of a summer, and then when the school year starts, you kind of make adjustments. And so what he used those AI to do is to be able to, okay, how can I teach these kids? How can I be able to, change my lesson plan? Maybe we're falling behind. Now we have to figure out how to catch them up. Or maybe perhaps we have to put less emphasis on one lesson and then more on other ones. And so he used AI for that, to help him just kind of figure, not necessarily create a lesson plan, but just to help him with those things. How do I know when to bridge those gaps? How do I know what to kind of remove from the lesson plan, and just being able to create be more fluid with that. So that was one interesting application I was taught about, of how we can combine AI with the traditional way of learning. So that's one way I can think about. I can answer it just based on experience from what I've heard about him, and I know him pretty well, and he just loves his students, and he's just trying to find different ways to be able to just lighten his load, but also be able to be more perceptive to how different students learn, and being able to either help them catch up, because his school doesn't have like a special needs or anything like that. So he has special needs kids in his class. So he has to be able to create a lesson plan to help all students, and then AI doing that, and then being able to kind of vaguely tell them, okay, here's how our students are looking. How do I help them catch up? How do I help improve the lesson plan? Or how do I know when to go back a lesson because maybe they don't understand it quite well? I'm not sure exactly how he does it, but that was one good way that I can think about to answer that question, because it's something that he's talked to me a lot about. So
Thank you. Professor Dev, what's your answer for this question? How can traditional knowledge be combined with modern science or AI to create new and sustainable solutions?
The way that I'm approaching this is I work with university students. I have basically an unlimited number of interns. And so because of that, I can say to them, here is a problem that needs to be solved. And in this case, I wanted to create a package that we could take to schools and say, this is what we want to use in order to cover the waterfront on helping kids understand how to go green and get their families involved in solving this problem. So I say to the kids, use all the tools that you can find. And these are college students who are either freshmen, sophomores, juniors. Some of them are seniors, but most of them are undergrads. And so I just give them the wherewithal to use AI as they wish to help us to move the project forward. And so what you have a combination there of open-minded young people who see a problem that I'm saying needs to get solved, and the world of AI. And so they go out, and I had 18 of them last semester, and they go shopping for AI tools to help us to solve the problem. Well, by the end of the semester, I had only 12 because 6 of them weren't able to find the AI tool that they wanted to find. But the others had a great time because they went spelunking into the cavern of AI. And what they found were tools that they could use to make adjustments to the idea that I had presented to them. So the idea I presented to them was that we needed to take this book, the Green Actioneers Family Action Guide, and we needed to make it adaptable to everybody. Well, when they looked through the book, they said, oh, we don't think your book is appropriate for elementary school kids because too many words and the pictures aren't fun. So then they decided that they were going to make their own pictures using AI. They did a wonderful job, and they're so much more fun because they're not constrained by old thinking. It's AI thinking. And they said, well, if you want families to go green, why don't you set up a system of advancement like we have in scouting? And so then they designed these badges that the kids can win and wear and share with their parents for different levels that they can attain in going green. So it's all step by step. And the great thing now is that we have traditional thinking, learning, and books and classrooms, and we've got the gift of AI to help us to move forward. AI has now written us 48 songs. So out of the 95 green actions in the book, we've got songs for 48 of those green actions, and they're so much fun. So I think that what we're seeing now is a transformation of the way that things get that subjects get taught, that subjects get learned, and that society is going to be functioning, and the transformation is going to include a tremendous amount of new thinking that is human augmented by AI. So to me, this is a very exciting time of life. It's like a point at which things are going to change, and we're going to see a real shift in how people learn and how people teach. And for instance, traditional schools, unfortunately, are not going to be as important as they've been in the past. There's going to be an awful lot of learning that takes place elsewhere. And so we've got to learn to adjust to that. It's a big problem, but actually it's a big adventure.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor David, you are a wicked problem solver. And with iBeyond, you are solving very complex problem. You are deploying your innovations in India, in Middle East, and around the world. What existing resources, from your point of views, like land, data, talent, waste, energy, is currently underused? And how could innovations unlock its value?
Well, that's a great one, Dr. Sharif, because it runs a little counter to what we hear mostly in the press today, and mostly in what we see and hear as we talk about technology. So local, real-time, operational data from the communities, from the infrastructure, from the environment, really are one of the things that are the most underused resources today. So what I mean is real-time, a term I picked up in the intelligence world, but it's so true, is ground truth data from buildings, from water systems, from energy, from mobility, looking at the micro climates, what are the community behaviors, what's happening with the local businesses, the local government, the public spaces, the environmental sensors. The problem is that this data is everywhere, but it's not captured. It's fragmented, very, very, very unstructured. There's not data models which cover this. It's not shared. It's not governed, and it's really not used in decision making. And that I think is very, very important because if we don't have good data, we cannot optimize microgrids. We cannot predict water demand. We cannot manage traffic flows. We cannot reduce race. We cannot improve emergency response times. And that list goes on and on and on. And without that, it doesn't let us do good planning. It doesn't let us really exploit the things we can do to increase the region, to increase the technopolis. So this local data really helps enables new industries. It helps enable digital transformation. You know, we've heard and we talk on your programs often about lifelong learning. This helps you really put lifelong learning into a local context with workforce upskilling. It helps lower the cost of living, and it gives you better productive public services. And with it, you've got to build this local platform, this local data mesh, this local technopolis that includes the sensors, the edge computing modes, orchestration platforms like ours and others. And it lets you begin to convert this raw data into actionable intelligence. And it lets you create new economic models around the data. And I mean, there's so many other places that your question drives in things like how do I better utilize the roofs of buildings and other stuff like that. But I think the answer I gave you is probably the strongest one for me.
Thank you. Carlos, what's your thought? What existing resources, land, data, talent, waste energy is currently underused, and how could innovation unlock its value?
I think I want to preface first saying that this answering the question would end up being my opinion because I'm not like an expert or anything in this kind of field. I'm very open to always say that I'm not an expert when it comes to certain things. So I would say a resource that's underused. I think the only one way I can answer the question. I mean, I know David gave a great answer, and it's kind of wondering like, okay, what else could I add to it, or what other way can I answer the question? I think the only thing I can think about is when it comes to the idea of the housing crisis. So one of the things with the housing crisis is everyone wants to live in cities. Everyone wants to. That's why we have such an issue of building houses, building this, that. And I would say that, I mean, as I said, I guess, again, it's my opinion. I'm not sure if this would really answer the question, but one of the things with the housing crisis is that cities are big, cities are compact, especially here in San Jose. The only way we can really do certain things is build up. So you're seeing a lot of apartments, you're seeing a lot of like small patches of land become apartments. But I think what a lot of people have been saying is that just the way San Jose does zoning and it does its zoning laws, that's that kind of like limits how they can build or where they can build because you can either somehow find some patches of land in the San Jose or you can like urban sprawl your way out. And I think what a lot of people were saying is that when it comes to zoning, a lot of people tend to go vote or whatever against like single family housing, and that's something that I've been reading about a lot. So yeah, it's just one of those things that at least for me, when I'm not an expert at it, and I'm very open to saying that, it's kind of hard for me to answer the question. But I mean, that's the first thing I can think about. It's just like at least in San Jose, Mountain View, this whole South Bay area, it seems like at least from all the forums and stuff I read, and then from the news articles, it seems like it seems like really right now we have a housing crisis here, but it could easily be solved in certain ways by updating the zoning laws because they're still the same ones from like the 1950s, 60s. But you know how it is. Some people, a lot of people are landlords and they don't want their houses to go down in value when they build houses. So you're kind of very limited in where you can build. So that's the way I would say it. So I think, at least for San Jose, there is a lot of, I think, land. If I want to talk about just being able to connect the two, because that's from what I've been reading and from what I've been seeing, that seems to be the case. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Dev. You are experienced entrepreneur. So what's your thought?
Well, I think all of those are currently underused. And the reason they're underused is because of governance, that we tend to try to over govern the use of land. Now we're trying to over govern the access to data. And we need to have a free access to the ideas that might, for instance, as Carlos says, you have legacy governance that is not keeping up with current geographic and political needs. So we need to have governance which is current and which is flexible and is adapted to the locality. For instance, the waste that gets created in society could be recycled and utilized appropriately. But unfortunately, it's often just burned off. And then it creates a secondary problem. And so we aren't looking at the whole issue. We aren't looking at waste and energy. We're looking at either waste or energy. But we should look at waste and energy and land all together because we could use that waste through composting to renew the land and grow the crops and the trees to create the energy. But instead, each of those is siloed. So the waste company is doing its job. It's just burning everything it can get its hands on. The energy company is doing its job. It's drilling for oil, or it's hopefully beginning to use solar, wind, and geothermal. And so you put all these together and give them a comprehensive governance, then we can move things forward. But as long as they're siloed, it's very difficult to move forward. So then what's the most efficient way to create a governance that is not manipulated by one or another of the entities in order to line their pockets to the detriment of everybody else? And I think that is the current problem of humankind, is how are we going to move forward without enriching a very small number of people and instead move forward and enrich everyone. And so that would include better governance of the land, better use of the data, better marshaling of the talent, better disposal of the waste, and better production and distribution of energy. So governance becomes a really important element here. And I'm not sure how we're going to be solving that in our country in the near future. And I don't know about the rest of the world.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, if cost and regulations were not barrier, what bold ideas would you test immediately to improve lives and productivity?
Well, Dr. Sharif, I could talk on that one for an hour, so I'll try not. Uh, and Carlos, I love what you were saying because I live in Austin, Texas, but we're seeing the opposite of what I see in Silicon Valley. We're actually, my wife and I used to live downtown. We considered going up on the 54th floor of one of the condos. Instead, we went out to the edge of town where I have a green belt in my backyard.
Yeah.
I have deer, possums, armadillos, turkeys, foxes coming up to the back of our yard. And I'm sorry, I just can't get that in the city center. So while I agree with you, I see, at least here in Austin, the trend where our unoccupied rate in the city center is extremely high right now. And so we're seeing the opposite here. And it might be because Austin started as a technopolis, where Silicon Valley started as a dense engineering community where density was the driver. When you look at things like Moore's Law, that was one of the cornerstones there with Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce and others that helped establish that. And when I look at the initiative of Silicon Valley, I see more of the same, and I don't see a new transformation when I read their documents. So I love your comments, but I kind of disagree a little bit. But coming back to Sharif's question, and Dr. Sharif, you know my answer from reading some of my white papers and things. What I see here is really a nationwide network of AI-enabled communities, a technopolis, where you combine the small, medium, large companies. You involve the citizens. You involve the regulatory and governmental agencies. You involve academia at all levels. And you pull them together to create an AI-enabled platform. And since the world today, everything's become a system of systems, you have to combine these multiple platforms to be able to work with it. But what's really interesting is that this is the bonus idea because it really targets the root of productivity. It's not just technology, but also influences human capabilities and the spirit of group intelligence that makes things work. And some of the elements of this is how do you look at energy in your microgrids? How do you look at local computing? We at Dr. Sharif, as you know, we build AI-enhanced mini-mesh data centers so that the local governance can be there, so that you can do Internet of Things where latency is a huge problem. But you've got to do that with AI orchestration, where you can get personal learning models, health, mobility, community resources, and where it lets you put together the tools to transform and elevate the human capital at all levels. And we know that education's changing. We know that training's changing. We know even the lookout on jobs and things was changing. Now, if I go back 30 years ago, at least here in my communities and in Texas and everything, we were doing almost everything we could to move manufacturing out. Well, we're moving that all back in now because we realize local matters. Being in control of your destiny matters. And we're seeing big things. We are launching here in the area around me the longest smart highway in the world with just tremendous things on it, including in-motion EV charging, all those type of things to do there. But what it does is we look at this type of technopolis mesh network. It collapses dozens of fragmented systems into one integrated platform. Instead of separate clinics, training programs, energy systems, digital systems, you get this all in one unified AI orchestrated community operating system. We call it a sovereign operating system. At the level you're talking about, Dr. Sharif, it's really a community operating system because it increases productivity, health, skills, mobility, resiliency, helps you have more opportunities, and it really helps you improve the quality of life. And it creates a new digital economic engine because it lets you see each of these hubs becomes its own startup incubator accelerator, its own workforce transformer, its own way to optimize what's happening. And, the technologies are there to make this happen. And that is what, we're trying to do with our IBEON Technopolis approach, because I believe this is how you have to look at the future of things. You have to think globally, but you have to act locally too. You've got to adapt to your changing human capabilities, your capacities, but you have to have the mindset where it all comes together. And you have to look at institutions and say institutions have changed, like University of Texas, Stanford University, MIT are all coming to grasp that they're no longer the only provider of advanced knowledge. In fact, they're just a facilitator that lets knowledge happen outside of them in most cases today. And that's a big tidal shift. And it's because the world has changed. And many universities haven't changed since the times of Socrates. And I mean, the methods, their approaches are all the same. And so you've got to look at new models. You've got to look at ways to transform. And the other question that you asked earlier, Dr. Sharif, I want to tag on because I need to go before long, is you've heard me say that there's a reason why the windshield on your car is larger than your rearview mirror. It's more important where you're going and where you've been. And your question here on what can we do with the speeds of innovation, that is particularly true. You want to recognize the past, you want to learn from the past, but my seeds of innovation is what I'm doing. I'm looking out my windshield. Well, I'm looking out as far as my headlights can reach, but I want to go beyond where my headlights can reach. And that's really, to me, what the seeds of innovation are that you're basing this program on, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you. Carlos, what's your thought about this question? Like, if cost and regulation were not barrier, what bold idea would you test immediately to improve lives and productivity?
Well, I think to answer the question, it would be I mentioned earlier that I work for a startup right now, and in the previous startup, I started with a couple of people. Like we found an investor. We had it running for a few years. We were trying to create self-driving technology for trains. So I think if cost and regulation were not an issue, that's the idea of going, because I know someone who lives in San Jose, and then San Jose and the Bay Area in general is just very car heavy. But before 3 years from now, so I've only been driving for 3 years. I've only had a car for 3 years. So the 27 years before that, I always took the bus. I always took BART. I always took Caltrain. So I would say that's my idea. Not I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bold idea, but it's an idea that when I was doing that startup, and then our investor was very knowledgeable in just the industry, it seems it's like an industry that doesn't really like to move forward or change. So, like
Yeah.
BART's a great example where our investor, his friend actually was a lead engineer for BART for 20 years, and we were talking to this guy. His name is Gene. We were talking to this guy, and when we met up with him, maybe 2 years ago, he was like, "Oh yeah, I still have contacts in BART. They're still using the same onboard controller for the trains that I invented in 1976. They're still using the exact same like driver's seat, exact same everything that he made in the 70s. So that's what I would say. This bold idea is, I wouldn't say it's necessarily bold. It's just something that people just don't want to touch. And I've been to multiple, not just we were developing, but I've been to multiple conferences and multiple places that talked about these things, and they were saying showing different technologies you could use. Like you can use like one of them was one option for people was using like UWB beacons so that the train can know its position, and it when it gets really close, there's like a sensor on the train that would connect to that beacon, and that beacon would light up, and then that's how it knows its position so that it knows what station is on, or it knows, oh, this beacon is 100 meters from the station, so it would be able to know when to slow down and speed up. So there's like multiple ways to do it. They're not they're I'm not gonna say exactly for sure that it's easy to scale, but it's definitely a lot simpler than it sounds really simple. So there's a lot of really simple solutions to do that, and there's a lot of things those conferences go toward and talk about how you'd still have a driver, but it would be a self-driving train. There'd be electric. A lot of trains in Silicon Valley right now are going electric. Caltrain just became electric a year ago after like 10 or 15 years. It took 10 or 15 years to electrify the trains. So that's the idea I would go on because I liked that startup. I thought we were doing some good work, but yeah, the cost was mostly cost was a big factor because we could have a lot of like small prototypes, medium-sized prototypes, but a lot of other investors don't want to jump in unless you have a large prototype. And the large prototype is they'll ask, "Oh, I want to be able to ride on the train to show your self-driving technology," and it's just we're 10 people. I don't know how we're gonna build a full-size train with a small track for you to ride on to see the technology. So that cost was more a big issue with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I can follow up on that pretty easily. I'm in Orlando, Florida. The streets are crowded. It's a city that's growing really, really rapidly, and the whole region is growing really, really rapidly. So, what are they deciding to do? Two things. One is self-driving cars, and the other is bus rapid transit. And that's so silly because what they could do instead, but it's difficult because of the politics involved, is they could put everything up above the roadway, and we could have something like it's Transit X. Transit X is a track that runs up above the street, and pods that hang underneath and move on a central rail, and there are no stations, they're just stops. So wherever you live, if you have Transit X, you walk out your door, you climb or take the elevator, or it's out the second floor window, and you get into your pod and you go wherever you want to go. It's just beyond their comprehension, and it's also beyond their financial structure, because their financial structure is all earthbound. So they have to get up above the earth. They have to get up 24 feet in the air in order to be able to even comprehend what this is. So I've tried to talk within the transportation network here in Central Florida about getting this up above the road and doing it with solar power. And it's like, oh, we don't want to hear that. No, we've already got it figured out. We're gonna have self-driving cars, and we're gonna have bus rapid transit. Bus rapid transit is not rapid. It's very slow. And so getting the attention of leadership and getting them to think outside the box is really, really key to everything. And it takes me back to the very first thing that I said. You have to start with something small, prove that it works, and then build it up step by step. So as you're suggesting, Carlos, you have to have a demonstration of this. Well, we've got demonstrations. I live in Orlando, and right over at Disney World, we've got a monorail. Now it's sitting on the rail. It's not pod suspended under a rail, but it works. So what did they do at Disney? Instead of creating something that really would be a transformational idea, they got a bunch of cable car baskets and put them underneath a moving wire. Very, very old school. It kind of looks like a ski lift. And so now they've got a ski lift that they're running around Disney when they could be doing something really innovative. So there's a door that has to open for you to get in with a new idea. And it's very difficult to open that door if you don't have the appropriate credentials or a huge amount of money, because that's how you get into discuss with them this new idea, because they don't want to hear it, because they're making their money off of surface transportation. The company that is most invested in Orlando is called Mears, and Mears does surface, and that's all they've ever done. And if you get to the airport in Orlando, you get on a Mears bus and you go into Orlando on slow moving roadways, and that's about as far as they can think. So changing the leadership is important, and creating methods for people to be open-minded, whether they want to be open-minded or not, to make them sit in a meeting and listen and understand. Instead, I go to these meetings and it's really like, okay, next, please. We don't want to hear that. Next, please. So it's a difficult problem.
Thank you. Professor David Smith, my last question. How can innovation be designed so that a rural and marginalized community benefit first, not last?
Well, what you're doing with this question, Dr. Shreve, is you're flipping the traditional innovation model on its head, because the traditional innovation model has trickle down technology. And what is required to do what you're talking about is you have to build ground up capability, local ownership, and community structures and infrastructure that make this work. And that is a pretty big change as you look at how infrastructure works. So it starts with principles. Innovation should be built with the wider set of communities and not just for them. Most innovation that fails in rural and marginalized communities because it was optimized for dense markets. It's dependent upon centralized infrastructure. And I hate to say this, but it's almost all designed by people who are in cities. To reverse this innovation must be co-designed across the Technopolis. It needs to, wherever possible, be operated locally and adapted to the local culture, the local climate, the local economies. But it must, on the other hand, be structured in a system approach, a platform approach, where it can be applicable to high densities as well as the rural communities. And that's why we're seeing all the changes on the way we build systems and the systems of systems. How we even write software has changed from monolithic to using modular approaches, microservices and things to make it happen. So if we build innovation on a distributed and not a centralized model, what would it be? You would begin to think more like a mesh, because centralized systems always disadvantage rural areas, but this distributed system empowers the local rural base. So that's where mesh approaches, platform approaches have to come in. Some of the models you can look at things are like the local microgrids that we're seeing becoming more common. We're seeing local data ownership, local mobility hubs. I love listening to Dave, because what we're doing here is Musk is building us some tunnels to get from different places in the city to the airport without having to go down freeways. and using autonomous vehicles to do that. But that the AI is going to help us solve this problem you're discussing, Dr. Sharif, because it's going to see us do things like AI-enabled healthcare, very personalized learning for the people who are not in the dense areas. In fact, I almost will predict that if I'm in a rural area 10 years from now, I'm going to have better education, better personalized learning than I do if I'm in a dense city. You're going to see uh, many more sensors begin to be used in these, particularly the rural areas, and you'll see that. So you're going to see some shifts on even how logistics happen. You're going to create more and more local micro enterprises where you can train local operators, where you can enable local maintenance teams and others. And but the biggest thing you need to do is you're going to have to see some structural shifts to redirect the investment model where it takes these into account more. And if I kind of put up, I've been thinking when I saw this question earlier, Dr. Shree, how do we do that? How do we build it? And one of the things is I'm coaching other startups and things. One of the things I tell them is your MVP should not go to your largest customer first. And that goes into the face of what universities teach startups. And to me, your question here is a direct way for it. If I'm a startup and I want to test my big, bold innovation, why don't I test it first in a rural environment where the cost of failure is not as large, the publicity is not as large unless you want to make it that way, but where you have the innovations there, because in the rural, it's a simpler governance, oftentimes faster deployment. You have clearer outcomes. And what's interesting, if I test it first, a test bed in the rural, it brings stronger community input to it. And then if I can do it there, then let me scale to the cities, let me scale to the bigger markets. And to me, this is one of the things, because if I'm launching into a rural environment, I'm gonna have to spend more time, Carlos, you'll hate me for this one, but I'm gonna have to spend more time in engineering. I'm going to have to optimize my bandwidths. I'm going to have to optimize my energy uses. I'm going to have to do the things that when I taught at the university, these were things that engineering should do, is optimize, but engineering today doesn't optimize. I mean, I look at my engineering teams across the multiple companies we have, and I don't think optimization is a word that any recent even understands today. Even when we try to refactor our code and thing, it's really not looking at how to optimize it. It's how to clean up errors in most cases. So to me, that's how you can look at how innovation can be designed so that the rural benefits first, like your question asked. And I think the rural environment is a fantastic test bed that 99% of companies overlook. And to me, Dr. Sharif, as you're looking at this, I hate to say it, but that's really where I think it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Carlos, what's your response? How can innovations be designed so that rural and marginalized communities benefit from, not last?
First, I want to say that, I mean, I just want to agree with Dave. I think Dave had a great answer, but I also want to agree with Dave that, yeah, optimization is a very scary word for a lot of engineers. It's always the next guy will do it. So that's why no one ever wants to do it. And I've experienced that way too much times. So I understand what it is. Yeah, it's always the next guy will deal with it. So I feel like going into the question, it would be honestly a lot with what I really resonate with what David said about just using rural areas as a test bed. And one of the things that I was thinking about with the question that reminded me is kind of like, I know it's not a new technology, it's pretty settled, but if you're thinking about like fiber or broadband, just internet connection in general, that's still something that here in the cities is pretty like normal. It's pretty like settled. But if you were to go like a rural area, they still have some places still have struggle with the internet access. So some people I know who live in rural areas will like use Starlink as an example to break that. And so the thing with fiber is that fiber has kind of distance, so you can only go so far, and it's just the way it is. So going to what Dave said, I think a lot of technologies would benefit from being tested in a rural environment first, because I think it is true a dense city. Let's say just using fiber as an example, it's pretty simple to test because so many people are close together. But in the end of the day, you have to benchmark and you have to see your limits, like your lower limits, higher limits with any technology. So, or just testing out. Let's see how far a fiber connection go as an example. I think if you're testing a rural area, it's yeah, it's a lot easier, but you would be able to see your limits better, I guess, when it comes to that. I just think, yeah, I just what I'm trying to say, I just agree with David, where it's just testing in rural areas would be good because I think if you get technology to work in a rural area where the population is sparse, maybe your neighbors are like a mile, 2 miles from you, then it would be able to be applied easier to a denser city, especially if distance is one of those is if distance is a factor. So I personally that's the way I see it from a test engineer standpoint, just being able to it's a better place to test, easier to test, and I think you get an easier, better understanding of how it works or the limits of your technology if you did that, whether it's grid or anything. And I think that's better to work when because I think one of the worst things us engineers do is I think we were talking about it earlier. It's great to start small, but I think one of the things us engineers do and we did in my startup is we start really small and figure out how something works in a very specific standpoint, and then money and and investor gets too happy. Okay, scale it up, and then we scale up and it fails. So
Thank you. Professor Dev, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think that innovation to be designed for rural and marginalized communities is the way to take that little idea and test it and make it big. For instance, I would not start an overhead solar powered pod system in Austin or in San Jose or in Orlando. I would start it somewhere small in a little town. Connect everybody in that little town so that they can all see that it works. Then bring the news media in and look at it and say, wow, this really works in this little town. Wouldn't it be great to do this in the big city? Because in the big city, you've got vested interests that are aligned against your new idea, whatever the new idea is. I use this overhead transportation because it's so logical, and because nobody's doing it in this country. It will be done, I assume, in Bangladesh before it's done in the U.S., where we elevate people up above the flood and up above the land and move them using solar power. It just makes so much sense. But there's so many vested interests on the ground. So what you do is you find a community where you could innovate somewhere. Now, in the Middle East, they're building entire cities that are innovation cities. And that is a wonderful way to go to one of those cities that they're building. Masdar comes to mind, where they're starting from scratch. And we thought they were going to do that with Disney World. When they started, Walt's idea for Disney World was that it was going to be a world, that there was going to be people living there, and that it would be multi-storied, and that it would all be run from an underground nexus. But then Walt died, and so the ideas that he had died with him. So what we have to do is memorialize Walt Disney by taking the same ideas, the idea of creating a self-contained, sustainable community, and actually get it started somewhere. And then that will spread, because it will be looked at from the outside, and it will be appreciated from the outside. But trying to do it in Austin or Orlando or San Jose is not going to work, because there are too many vested interests that are going to go, don't do that here. This is my territory. I'm the one who bought the buses. I'm the one who created the BART. BART is antiquated. Although most cities need a BART or something like that, they're going to go look at the existing BART and try to build something like that, or like the subways in New York. They're going to try to replicate the subways in New York, rats and all, when instead they could go up above the ground and do a solar powered transportation system. So just using that as an example, I think it would be wonderful to find a rural area in Texas or California or Florida where they would let us come in and start from scratch using local people, local resources, to build a local transportation system that would get us up above the ground and get rid of fossil fuels and get rid of accidents that kill people, because those are the two things that are most detrimental from our current vehicle system, is death by automobile and death by breathing the fumes of the automobile. So let's start over again. Where do we do that? Not in a city.
Thank you. Dr. David Smith, what's your closing remarks for today's session?
Well, we've talked about a lot of things, Dr. Shreve. This is going to be my shortest closing remarks I've ever done with you. I'm going to go back. I'm showing my age here. There was a Nike commercial that said, "Just do it." That's my closing remark here. We've got great ideas, and we really just need to do them. We've got the ideas. We have the seeds of innovation. I mean, just from your broadcast today, there's dozens and dozens of seeds of innovation. We just need to go do it. So thank you.
Thank you. Carlos, what's your closing remarks for today?
For me, I just want to say thank you all. It's a pleasure talking and just learning and just seeing different perspectives on different questions. I think that's what my favorite thing with these things always is, just seeing the different perspectives, seeing different states and then different issues locally. It helps kind of, I think it's very easy, at least in California and Silicon Valley, to be very much like, oh, we focus on ourselves and then forget about the world that's outside of us. And
Thank you,
so,
Dave.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to thank everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, what's your closing remarks?
Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning. I think we have to think big. We have to think outside the box. We have to start small with a niche and create a model. And then we have to go step by step, and don't quit. Stay positive. and build on what we have learned from that model. And then we can build a new social order. We can build a new society. We can build new governance, and we can build new physical facilities. But we've got to start with that seed, that idea, and it probably isn't going to come from a university or an existing structure. It's going to have to come from outside, because all the good stuff always comes from somewhere else.
Thank you, everyone, for these excellent sessions. I'm sure through these sessions, everyone can learn a lot of interesting things. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with the government agency, corporation, and academia. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Professor Dave, and thank you, Professor David Smith, for your continuous support for WT.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you.
Thank you.